Today, we're going to talk about one of the most, well, audacious engineering feats in all of history. Seriously, we're talking about a story where a major American city faced a problem so fundamental, so crippling, that their only option was to physically lift the entire downtown, buildings, streets, the whole shebang, several feet into the air.
Just let that sink in for a second. Not one building, not a couple of houses. We're talking entire city blocks. So how on earth did they pull that off? And maybe more importantly, why would they even try something so completely radical? Well, to get the solution, you first have to understand the problem.
And to really get a handle on this incredible solution, we first have to talk about the absolutely miserable problem Chicago was dealing with back in the mid-19th century. Turns out, its very foundation was its greatest enemy.
And that's it. That is the core of the issue right there. The city was basically set up on marshland, just barely above the water level of Lake Michigan. And as the city grew, and I mean it grew at a crazy fast pace, this soggy foundation turned into a total waking nightmare.
Look, this wasn't just some minor inconvenience. We're talking about streets that were literal pits of mud, so deep that horses and carts would get stuck, and in some stories, they'd just disappear completely. Buildings were actually tilting, sinking right into the soft ground. And with no way for water to drain, the city had zero functional sewers. That led to rampant diseases like cholera and typhoid. Chicago was this booming, bustling city that was slowly but surely drowning in its own filth.
So, what do? Do you just abandon the city? Try to rebuild it piece by painful piece? Well, a few brilliant minds came up with a third option, one that sounded like it was straight out of a science fiction novel.
Enter George Pullman, a guy who would later become famous for his fancy railway cars. He was one of the key engineers behind this plan. And the idea? Well, it was as simple as it was bold. If the city is too low, then just raise it. All of it. The streets, the sidewalks, the multi-story brick buildings, everything. And how are they planning on doing this? With this surprisingly simple piece of technology, the jackscrew. It's a basic machine, right? It can lift immense weight just by turning a screw. It was a proven tool, sure, but it had never, ever been used on this kind of epic scale before.
The sheer scale of this operation it's hard to even wrap your head around. To lift just a single city block, you needed an army of workers operating thousands of these jackscrews in perfect unison. 6,000 of them, all working together, became the mechanical muscle for this absolutely monumental task. Okay, so lifting sidewalks and smaller buildings, that's one thing. But the real test, the proof of concept that would capture the world's imagination, involved something much, much bigger. Could this crazy plan really work on one of the grandest buildings in the entire city without even interrupting business? And this brings us to the most famous part of this whole story, the raising of the Tremont House Hotel. This single event became the poster child for Chicago's incredible and very literal upward move. And just look at the challenge they were up against. This was not some small wooden structure. We're talking about a 5-story luxury hotel made of solid brick, weighing an estimated 10,000 tons. It was going to take a perfectly coordinated crew of 600 men to even try it. But here it is. Here's the most mind-boggling part of the entire operation. They did it all while the hotel was fully operational. The guests stayed, they slept in their beds, they ate in the dining room, they lived their lives completely unaware that the 10,000-ton building around them was being slowly lifted into the air.
Just try to imagine this scene. You're a guest at the Tremont House. You have breakfast, maybe you play a game of billiards, and then you head to your room for a nap. All the while, hundreds of men are in the basement right underneath you, silently and slowly raising the entire building inch by inch. The operation was so smooth, so precise, that not a single pane of glass broke, and most of the guests didn't even notice a thing.
So how did they pull off this miracle of coordination? It was basically a symphony of simple actions. Thousands of jackscrews were put under the building's main support beams. Then, on the sound of a whistle, each of the 600 men would give their jackscrew a precise quarter turn. The whole building would rise a tiny fraction of an inch. Then, another whistle, another turn. They just repeated this over and over for days, until the hotel stood 4 feet higher. The successful lift of the Tremont House proved it could be done. And so, over the next decade, much of downtown Chicago was raised in the exact same way, transforming the city from a swampy mess into a modern metropolis.
And the transformation was absolute. The muddy quagmires were replaced with dry, elevated streets. Sinking foundations were stabilized. And most importantly, the space they created underneath the city allowed for the one thing it desperately needed to survive and thrive.
And that right there is the true legacy of this entire project. Raising the city wasn't just about escaping the mud. It was about creating the physical space, that higher elevation, needed for a proper, gravity-fed sewer and drainage system. This single massive undertaking solved Chicago's deadly sanitation crisis. And it did more than that. It created a blueprint for radical urban renewal, proving that a city's geography isn't a fixed destiny. It could be engineered, reshaped, and completely reimagined. It's just an incredible story of human ingenuity and teamwork. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most audacious, the most seemingly impossible solutions are actually the right ones. When Chicago was faced with a foundational problem, they didn't just rebuild, they literally thought on a higher level.